Spin Talk with John and Murren. Every weekday from 12:45.
It is Tuesday, Spin Talk here on Spin Southwest with John Hayes and Murren O'Connell. We're chatting about phobias and asking you what are your phobias. Some of the text messages in here as well. Brenda even is on Facebook. She says clowns, we discussed that already. Dwarves and balloons, three unusual ones. Globophobia is the fear of balloons. Nanosophobia is the fear of dwarves. But the question is, where do all of these fears and irrational kind of phobias stem from? We're chatting right now to John Francis Leader, who's a hypnotherapist from Dublin City Hypnotherapy Clinic. John, thanks for talking to us this afternoon.
Hey John, hey Murren, how you doing?
We're good. Now, explain to us about these phobias. What sparks these off?
Oh, it can be any number of different things, and that's what makes phobias, I think, such a, I don't want to say fun in any way to belittle them, but interesting, let's say, area to work in, because you'll hear every day of the week something that, no matter, I've done thousands of these consultations, and still every week I come across something I haven't worked with before, so it really keeps you on your feet. So generally they start because of, I suppose, an overuse of a very natural system that we have built into us, built into the brain, which is a kind of a protective mechanism. And if you think about it, think about your own life, there are certain things it's good to be afraid of. You're going to want to feel that anxiety feeling if you're crossing the road and a car's coming quickly, having a phobia of that moment and feeling a sharp burst of adrenaline in the system. That's going to protect you. It's going to make you run away from that situation. It's very useful. So usually we, based on our life experiences, it could be when we're a kid, maybe an experience we have which is a bit scary from that childhood perspective, or it could be recent in later life. We kind of overbelieve something is worse than it actually is. We form an association that something is scary. So it's actually for our own good we're feeling that fear, but it's happening just a little bit more than we'd otherwise want it to.
John, you're talking about an inbuilt, an early warning system that we have,
yes,
right? But some of these things, a lot of messages are coming in now about cotton wool, a fear of cotton wool. Now, surely that's not going to take over the world and kill us or pamper us with kindness. Why would people have a fear of such an inanimate, harmless object?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I'll tell you what's so interesting about it is if you work with 10 people, I have worked with people with a fear of cotton wool before, actually. It's not a very common one, but it's not an unpopular one either. But if you were to work as a therapist with 10 different people with that same phobia, you would probably find, and this is the interesting thing, 10 different reasons. And that's what makes phobias interesting. The same mechanism is behind it, but what tends to happen is associations are formed, and if you take any kid, that's born and they're exploring the world, they don't know what to make of the world around them. We don't know what's safe and what isn't. So if we have a kind of a nasty incident with cotton wool, as strange as it might seem, that childhood belief might grow. Okay. And as adults, we tend to do today what we did yesterday, because that kind of worked more or less. We do yesterday what we did last week, and so on back to childhood. So it can be something really small, like a belief that cotton wool, maybe, we can only speculate here because every person's different, but maybe, cotton wool when the person was a baby, the way it was used, or it associates with some part of their childhood or something, and
nappy
then they
rash.
Fear in.
Nappy rash. Could that be it?
Exactly. It could even be that. Exactly. Literally anything. That's the fun.
John, when you discuss people who have fears, people may have a light fear of flying, and maybe 5 years down the line, this fear has escalated to the point where it's debilitating. Is that common enough with most phobias?
Yes, it can be common, and really there's two I suppose, different types of phobias or two considerations. One is a fear of something which is a nuisance, but if you don't face that thing that often, it mightn't be much of an issue. And a classic example there is a phobia of snakes, which is a very common phobia. But of course, if you're Irish and you're, going about your day-to-day life, probably that's not going to be a major phobia. It's only when somebody's going on holidays to Australia that I get the phone call for the snake phobias, usually. Now, another example would be a social phobia, which is a phobia of just being in, spaces with people, meeting people for the first time, that type of thing, socializing. Now, everybody can have a little bit of that from time to time, depending on the context. But if that becomes a big phobia, then you can see why that would be a whole different ballgame, because a person can start leading their life in a very different way than they otherwise would. They can miss out work opportunities. They can lose a lot of money, as a result of it, because they can't get career progression, maybe by socializing or by public speaking would be another example. So some of them can become a very big deal, as you quite rightly say. So it's never too late to do anything about them. That's been my experience. But it's always good to start immediately in terms of an intervention, just to stop it from escalating, really.
Yeah. Now, you are listening to Spin Talk on Spin Southwest, and we're talking to John Francis Leader, who is a hypnotherapist, and we're discussing phobias today. So if you have a phobia, let us know. Meet here 085 7102 103. John, a message just after coming in. It says, I have a fear of nosebleeds. I got a panic attack when I had one last year. There was so much blood. If I see anyone who has a nosebleed, I get really freaked out. So that's a case of it actually impinging on someone's life, where they had a panic attack. Is that how they can manifest themselves? Can they take over someone's life?
Yeah, they absolutely can do. The mechanism in the brain that stops stops us from doing one thing and that brings in those panicky feelings is the fight or flight response, which is, if you read pop psychology, you'll come across it from time to time. It's become more and more popular recently. And that fight or flight response, really what it does is it kicks in adrenaline in the system. You get an adrenaline kick, and that's designed to do one or two things, hence the name of the mechanism. Fight, which obviously means fighting, defending yourself, or flight, running basically away from that situation as far as you can. And it stems back, they say, back to the old days, thousands of years ago. You're out in the forests and you need to fight to defend yourself, or you need to run. You need to use a lot of adrenaline one way or the other. So that's where the panic attacks come from. Panic attack happens when somebody sees something, they perceive it or hear it or whatever it might be, or even thinks of it, and they perceive it as something that might be a threat. It could be cotton wool, it could be, being attacked by a mugger, it could be anything at all. Really could be anything. But if they perceive that based on past experience as being a threat, what happens is the adrenaline kicks in. Now, if it is a real situation, let's say a mugging, well then fighting or running probably are the two options, that you'd want to use. But if you're faced with cotton wool, and the options are to fight it and to run from it, you see where the problem is. The adrenaline builds up in the system, and we don't know how to release it. So guess what happens? We start shaking or sweating, or there can be all kinds of different physical symptoms because we're not releasing that adrenaline. That's why that happens.
Okay.
When you talk about hypnotism and the fear or overcoming your fears, how does it work towards a solution?
Yeah, well, the funny thing about it is, and I always say this to people in the first session, is when you come in with a phobia to do hypnotherapy, usually what we're trying to do is actually take the person out of hypnosis and to give them self-control back, to teach them how their mind works. Because if you think about somebody who has a phobia, they're imagining it, they're picturing it, they're kind of detaching themselves from their surroundings and really thinking and putting themselves into an imaginative state where they're telling themselves there's going to be a problem, regarding whatever the phobia is about. So they're actually already hypnotizing themselves more and more into the problem as they worry about it. Worrying really is a form of negative hypnosis. So what we do in a hypnotherapy program is actually say, you know what, if you don't worry about things, you probably don't have any problem. But if you do worry about things, great, you have the mechanisms you need to be able to solve the problem. So what we get people in the hypnotherapy programs to do is what you could kind of call worry in reverse. So we get them to imagine, having a good connection with the thing that they're afraid of, or to start looking at the other side of it, to start broadening the way that they're approaching it. But we get them to do it in a very imaginative way, not just saying cotton wool's okay, because that's a very intellectual thing to say.
Right.
We're getting them to close their eyes and imagine why it's okay and get into it an awful lot more. And of course, depending on the degree of the phobia, we may need to understand where it came from in the first place and do some resolution work with that first. So that's the basic pattern for intervening.
Now, there's lots of questions coming in for you, John, but I have to ask you, do people ever come to you for hypnotherapy and just feel completely, stupid, like kind of going, listen, I've got a fear of cotton wool, I feel like an idiot, like, do they ever just kind of want, I can't believe I'm actually doing this?
I'll tell you something, Warren, if we could get one outcome from this interview, I always like to have a goal in mind when I'm doing anything. It would be to say to everybody out there listening that, listen, don't feel silly. You know what I mean? Get help, whether it's with me or someone else, it doesn't matter, but do get some assistance, research it and get some help, because virtually every person says what you just said there when they come in. I don't understand it, it doesn't make sense, etc. But what they don't realize is that really it's the same mechanism that creates the phobia that just keeps them safe and healthy in their life in general. It's just a little bit accentuated. And just because we maybe have a phobia of one thing and somebody else has of another thing, we tend to look at other people and we're not comparing like for like. We think, other people don't have that problem, but maybe they have 10 other problems that we don't have. So really we shouldn't feel silly about it. It's a very normal thing. Many people have phobias, and the thing is to do something about it, because there's a lot can be done.
Well, John, we are as well opening the phone lines, 1850 333 444, if you do have a phobia you'd like John to address. Ellen joins us now, and she's in Kerry this afternoon. Hi, Ellen.
Hi, how are you?
Now, Ellen, your fear is a little bit irrational. Tell us what you're scared of. You can speak to John.
I have a fear of knees.
Fear of knees, is it?
Knees, yeah.
And as you look back on that fear of knees, when did you notice that for the first time?
I've kind of always had it since I suppose since I was about maybe 12 or 13 or so, and ever since I just can't stand knees.
And how does that affect you in a day-to-day sense? What do you find yourself doing or not doing, or? I can't let anyone touch my knees. If someone touches my knees, I freak out. I can't let anyone talk about
knees around me, or accidents with knees, or falling, or anything like that. I can't deal with it. It just freaks me out completely.
Is this common, John, a fear of body parts?
Yeah, it can be quite common, and once again, many different sources for that. And of course, it's only if you were to really get into it in some detail, you'd find out the origin. But yeah, anything like that can be common, because a phobia, of course, is just a connection between one particular part of our life and a feeling of anxiety or concern. And do you remember, Alan, any particular experiences that were negative in your past involving knees? Is there anything like that that's in your mind?
Well, I did have a fall on a tile floor and chipped the bone off my kneecap, and I think that could have started it.
Yeah. And how long ago was that happened?
That was, I suppose I was about 11. 10 or 11
at the time.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean that's a good example, and of course we don't want to oversimplify things too much, but very often, at the age of 11, you're at that age, particularly where you're growing a lot. At that age, you're entering into kind of teenage years and adulthood, so we become very aware of the body an awful lot more, because we can get a bit taller or a bit longer, or things start to change as well in terms of our shape and height. So in terms of maneuverability. So usually what's happening is that some connection or some worry about, oh God, I better be careful in future, is becoming attached to your knees, which is the part that the problem was with. So what you might do, you might be able to reframe that a little bit by looking back on it and say that, well, you know what, back then at that age of 11, I was a kid, I was concerned about all kinds of different things, I'm sure, at that age, but now I'm grown up, I'm older now, I can look at it in a slightly different way. And back then it was all right to be worried about knees and things like that, but now it's a little bit different. And another little thing you can do from today onwards, if you want to, and of course get professional help if you want to really pursue this in detail, but just a little tip is to start thinking about the positive aspects of the knees and what they're really good for, and how well they've done you in your life to get to this point. You seem to be, doing okay. So look at it from the other perspective.
You can walk.
Exactly. So they're doing an awful lot of favors. They're probably good friends of yours. They're doing their best for you. So if you start looking at it in that way, you probably start to feel a little bit different already.
Ellen,
okay, thanks very much.
Cheers. Listen, thanks so much for talking to us today, Ellen. There, fear of knees. It must be a nightmare for her during the summer, but then again, we never have nice weather, so
yeah, I suppose it's not
she mightn't see that many.
John, is there such a thing as healthy phobias? Is it healthy to have a phobia and to be scared of something?
Yeah, well, the definitions of phobias are, as you'll know, a very kind of a controversial area. Normally it's defined as an irrational fear of something, but in some ways it's not even irrational, as we've just talked about. You know what I mean? It is based on something. It's never purely, it might be just, I suppose, a little bit more than we'd want. We're acting a bit strongly. So in some ways, having a healthy phobia, it's technically not a phobia then if it's a healthy fear. You usually wouldn't classify it as that. But if you were to phrase it differently and say, is it okay to be afraid of certain things or to feel anxiety around them? Well, of course it is, really. We've used the example of crossing the road and the car coming quickly. That's okay. Yeah. And the other point to kind of push it the other direction is some people like their phobias. And an example of that is skydiving, isn't it?
I guess so. It's facing your fear.
Can you imagine skydiving but feeling no adrenaline and quite bored while doing it? Do you think they do it? They love the feeling of the adrenaline. Roller coasters maybe is a better example for most people. We wouldn't all skydive. So the adrenaline can be very enjoyable for some people, and there are people who have had experiences in their past of kind of adrenaline and excitement being linked to pleasure or happiness for them. So they have like a reverse phobia. It's a connection in their mind that they actually like that type of thrill. So it doesn't need to be a problem. It can be a useful thing too.
Just to ask you before we let you go as well, John, one texter here saying, what happens at the end of hypnosis? For example, if somebody was afraid of spiders, are they able to now look at them and remove them from their house after a hypnosis?
Yes, is the answer. And if it's okay to mention, on the website hypnotherapy.ie, we have a full list of how exactly it works, the details, because naturally we can't go into all the ins and outs now. Hypnotherapy.ie, we have a free ebook on the details. But during hypnosis, you're fully aware, fully conscious. It's just all about gaining more control over what's happening, those kind of inner fears that we have, understanding them and resolving them. So during the session, you're going to be thinking about the same things you've always thought about, but in a different way. You're going to be looking at it from a different perspective. And at the end of the session, it depends now, of course, if we're working with somebody who also has depression and anxiety and other areas, naturally, of course, it's not going to be one session. We're going to be doing ongoing work to make sure we're not being overly simplistic in the work, to make sure we have a permanent solution. But yeah, once a program, be it a short or a medium term one, is completed, a person is going to be able to interact with it. They're going to be able to look at spiders. They're going to be able to, driving phobia is a common one we have. They're going to be able to go out and pass their driving test into stays independent. Now Sinead is one client who talks about that. She was uncomfortable before. Now she's going out and she's doing really well driving on motorways and all that. So yes is the answer, definitely.
Well, John, I want to thank you for coming on to us today. The website, as you mentioned as well, hypnotherapy.ie, and 0818 200 250 is the phone number. John Francis Leader, hypnotherapist from Dublin City Hypnotherapy Clinic. Thank you so much.